Over $12 billion in taxpayer money went straight to Goldman Sachs to make sure they didn't lose a penny on their bad AIG bets in 2008. General Electric paid literally no taxes in 2010. In 24 cases, corporate leaders received more in compensation last year than their businesses paid in federal corporate income taxes. Now, CEOs of these and other companies are suggesting ways to cover the federal deficit. Who do they think should bear the burden? The poor. The corporate chiefs have banded together with Campaign to Fix the Debt and are ubiquitous in the media, calling for major safety net programs, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, to be pared back. Lloyd Blankfein of Goldman Sachs made it very clear recently to CBS News.
You're going to have to undoubtedly do something to lower people's expectations, the entitlements, and what people think that they're going to get, because they're not going to get it.
Thank you, Lloyd. Not a popular sentiment, to be sure. What else are they for? Tax changes that would save their companies over $100 billion a year. To take a hard look at the views these CEOs are espousing, let's bring in Bill Cohen, former investment banker, Bloomberg View columnist, and author of Money and Power: How Goldman Sachs Came to Rule the World. Lynn Paramore, senior editor at Alternet. Thank you both for joining us. Lynn, let me start with you.
Sure.
Is this campaign to fix the debt just a Trojan horse behind which the CEOs are trying to implement things that would be really good for them?
I think it is. I think they were really hoping, some of them, that Mitt Romney might win the election and would get some of these things done without them having to go public. But now, as we just saw, Lloyd Blankfein and others are really going on a public campaign to convince Americans that we can't afford social safety net programs and that they need a windfall in tax breaks. And, you know, spirit of giving apparently is a little hard to find among some of these folks.
Look, Bill, you have been critical of your former brethren on Wall Street, and you've been, as you say, always rational, taking hard shots at them. You've got to admit, they're not the best messengers for this right now.
No, they are terrible messengers, you know, and I don't really understand. Lloyd Blankfein has fought going on, you know, CBS News TV for so long, and then he does go on, and they take a, you know, 2-minute clip out of a 40-minute segment and basically string him up with it. And it's unfortunate. I don't think they're the best messenger. I think they would admit they're not the best messenger for this. But on the other hand, Elliot, you know, I think it's important to point out that the Business Roundtable is even more to the extreme right of these guys. These guys are at least trying to be cooperative and bipartisan.
Okay, so you're making there's somebody worse argument to defend them.
Yeah,
Look, I don't want to give you a hard time. You're a good friend, full disclosure.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. You have Lloyd Blankfein, the Wall Street, the personification of Wall Street. He is Goldman Sachs.
Yes.
They have gotten so much munificence, so much money out of taxpayer pockets, and here he's saying, first thing, give us a tax break, which may make some sense in an arcane way, and then cut Social Security. Social Security isn't even adding to the deficit.
Look,
is there a defense for this?
Not really. I mean, I think but you have to look again to the wider program that they are proposing, which is Lloyd Blankfein said in his Wall Street Journal op-ed that he would be happy to have his taxes raised. And a lot of these guys, to their credit, have said they were willing to have their taxes raised. So clearly, there's got to be more than just a cut entitlements part of this
And I
problem.
gave Lloyd credit for that.
Okay.
Lynn, you have been intensely critical of this universe of voices. Why so harsh on them? They are saying some reasonable things.
Well, I think that in some ways their goals have gotten a little bit out of alignment with the rest of society. You know, there was a time when CEOs would not be so brazen as to talk about cutting entitlements in a time when a lot of people are still suffering and we have a huge jobs deficit. That's the real deficit that we need to worry about right now. For example, Jeffrey Immelt is part of this group that's been going around talking about cutting the social safety net. His predecessor from the 20s and the 40s, Owen Young, actually talked publicly about economic equality. He actually talked about how a man could not be free unless his wages were good, unless he was secure in his future and secure in his retirement. It's a very different tune.
Bill, I think Lynn's making an important point. Would the Jeff Immelts and would the Lloyd Blankfeins of the world have a lot more credibility if they stood up and said, you know what, our compensation has been out of whack? In other words, if they acknowledged that there were some disparities, the ratio of CEO comp to ordinary, that was simply crazy, and they said, we're going to pare that back, but here's what we also have to do.
Our compensation is out of whack. We got bailed out. We haven't been criminally prosecuted. The stock market has doubled.
Here's the bill we love. All right.
The stock market has doubled under, you know, the Obama administration, who we don't like, who we fought valiantly to try to defeat. Yes, they would have a lot more credibility if they said that. You know, again, I've made the argument that, you know, whatever it is, you know, the business of the American people, you know, used to be, you know, General Motors. What was good for General Motors was good for the American people. That same concept, you know, a derivative of that same concept still applies. We cannot have Wall Street and corporate CEOs going at the White House in Washington. I mean, it just isn't going to be good for anybody. So they've got to figure out a way to get along, and this is like a pathetic attempt, really, to try to get along.
But look, there's a larger point here for a separate time. It used to be the case that what was good for GM was, in fact, good for America. Now when GM produces more cars in China than here, it's not so clear that the interests are unified. And is that the point here? What Lloyd Blankfein is saying, what Jeff Immelt is saying, the tax changes they want may be good for their businesses, but may not be good for us as a political entity.
I don't actually think they're good for their businesses. I think this is very short-term thinking. I don't think they're thinking about the long horizon. What they're talking about is a result of the financialization of companies and CEOs obsessed with short-term profits, manipulating the stock prices so that they get short-term compensation. In some cases, that's not even good for the company 10 years down the road. And they have forgotten that taxpayers and employees are their constituents just as much as shareholders.
Well, I think what they're really saying here is that we've got to solve this federal deficit issue. We can't have this quote-unquote fiscal cliff hanging out there. They're saying, you know, that unemployment will rise a percentage point, we'll go into a double-dip recession. If either of those two things happen, that's going to be very bad for wages for the common man. It's going to be bad for the stock market, for everybody who's got investments there. It's going to be bad for our whole mental outlook as a country.
All of those are fair points. I think here the question really is the particular policies that they're proposing just don't align with what I think many people, and I included, see as being good for our economy writ large. Let me switch to the politics of this. Do you think, Lynn, that this group has much political sway inside a White House? As you said, as Bill said, they campaigned vigorously against Barack Obama. So when Lloyd Blankfein and Wall Street show up knocking on the door saying cut our taxes, will the president just give them the back of the hand, or will he welcome them in?
I would not underestimate the influence that these guys have in Washington. Some of them have actually been part of Obama's inner circle. There have been Jeffrey Immelt has sat on the head of the Jobs Council. The CEO of Boeing is the chairman of the Export Council. So they do wield a lot of influence. They also contribute a lot to political campaigns, and they have lobbyists crawling all over Washington to speak for them.
Bill, you've been in and seen that Washington culture. Why do they hold such sway? They are the scoundrels of the economic cataclysm we've all suffered through. Why do they still walk back in there and people open the door for them, lay down the red carpet?
Elliot,
it's that.
Money. It's money, and it's not that much either. If you look at the top 8 of the top 10 supporters of Obama in 2008 were Wall Street firms. This time around, 8 of the top 10 biggest supporters for Romney were Wall Street firms, and it's not that much money. It's like $1.5 million coming out of Goldman Sachs, #1 biggest supporter for Romney this time. Right. So they can get a lot of influence. And by the way, this isn't new. This has been going on for 100 years. I mean, Sidney Weinberg was going back and forth between the FDR's cabinet and Goldman Sachs for years.
Look, I'm glad you said it that way. Compared to what these companies are worth in their revenue, the amount of money they put into politics to get this way is de minimis. It's tiny.
But it's more than everyone else.
A lot of
more
bang
than
for your
everybody
buck.
else. And one other thing, in Washington, people still confuse success in business with intellect.
Yes, you're right.
A mistake that people should not make. All right, senior editor and alternate Lynn Paramore, Bloomberg View, columnist Bill Cohen, thank you both for your time tonight. The future